I'm Brandon Amoroso, and this is the D2Z podcast, building and growing your business from a Gen Z perspective.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to D2Z, a podcast about using the Gen Z mindset to grow your business. I'm Gen Z entrepreneur Brandon Amoroso, founder and president of retention as a service agency, Electric, as well as the co-founder of Scaleless. And today I'm talking with Patrick Barnes, who's the CEO of AMP, which is a platform that helps increase revenue with personalized online shopping experiences and also makes profit-driven decisions with all the business metrics that actually matter for you. And is the sort of parent company, if you want to call it that, to Lifetimely, which is a solution I've been using in the Shopify ecosystem since I really was just getting started in it. So it's a full circle moment here. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Brandon. And yeah, I was just saying before the show, I've seen some of your videos on Lifetimely a dozen plus times each. So yeah, appreciate it.
Of course. Before we jump into some of these items we want to cover here today, can you give everybody your own sort of quick story and background on yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started building apps for Shopify in one way or another in 2013. I joined a company called TradeGecko that was doing inventory and order management for Shopify. It was such a fun time to build for merchants, Shopify was maybe doing 16 million or 30 million or something in revenue. It was a really great time working there. I stayed there for a few years. I co-founded another company with one of the software engineers from TradeGecko, who also happened to be the younger brother of the CEO of TradeGecko. Stayed at TradeGecko for 3 years. Me and Lachlan then left, but we didn't really leave that far. We actually ended up selling that company to a company in the US called G2, which is a marketplace for all software, not just e-commerce software, kind of like Yelp for software. Funnily enough, TradeGecko ended up getting acquired by Intuit, specifically QuickBooks Online. And then, that's when the CEO of TradeGecko, my co-founder on AMP, Cameron, and I started working on AMP. It was actually during COVID. We used to just go on these long walks and both approaching the end of our earnouts, thinking about what we wanted to do next time. And we were probably always going to do another SaaS company, but it wasn't necessarily going to be e-com, but it was just through talking to customers, like just getting back stuck into it. And obviously, merchants are having different challenges to what they faced when we first started developing. And the reason we started AMP is we found that merchants were having to use 25 to 40 plus different apps to get their products, to get their companies to run the way they want. I'll politely say these are often of like varying quality. And the other two insights we had were typically the developers, the builders, like great entrepreneurs, no bad intentions or anything, but they're very focused on their product. Where for the merchant, the integration is the product. It doesn't matter if a shipping product has every feature and button and whatever, and a returns product has every feature and button and whatever. It's all about how they talk to one another is the actual most important thing to the merchant having a seamless experience. And that's where we started AMP to provide almost like a HubSpot for e-commerce with multiple deeply integrated products that help merchants generate incremental revenue. So we have Lifetimely on the analytics side, and then on the front end, we have an upselling product that helps leverage all the Lifetimely data to increase AOV on the first order, on subsequent returning orders. And I think the final other thing is I mentioned HubSpot kind of inspired us. The other company that inspires us as well is Costco. Like not only do we want to provide world-class software products that help merchants, we also want to help merchants save money. By doing that, their businesses should perform better, and they should actually Costco makes money by helping their customers save money, and that's what we want to do as well.
I feel like maybe that's where HubSpot started, but I don't know if you've seen a HubSpot contract in the last couple of months, but they definitely have taken their position and I mean, it is expensive. Fortunately for the new business, they have like a startup program.
Yeah,
So for your first 2 years, it's anywhere, I forget the exact number, but I think it's like 50 to 70% off, which is great. But after that, I mean, it starts to get really expensive. But to your point about the integration side of things, like there, that's table stakes at this point for us. If we're, choosing a new platform, or if we're thinking about, potentially doing a migration from one tool to another, how it integrates with the rest of everything that's going on, and also its own products within within its own company is crucial, because if one system doesn't talk to another, then there's really no point in even having the conversation, because we're not going to be able to leverage it.
totally. And I just layer on top of that, there are levels to that game, like as to how well it integrates. Is it like an API call, like when this happens, one other thing happens, or is it actually like core?
I think maybe the scariest thing on the tech side is for a potential prospect or for an agency to ask to see the actual documentation behind, what is going on, because more often than not, it sounds a lot better than what it actually is.
Yeah, completely agree.
So, what made you want to, get back into things after the first successful business and exit?
Yeah, one, apart from just generally to use the overused term, like we are kind of gluttons for punishment, but really it was just those conversations with merchants. I'd say, one of the things we were chatting about before the show is like, what are we doing the same and what are we doing differently? The number one thing we're doing the same is just absolutely obsessing over merchants and starting with the merchant and working backwards from there, and speaking to those merchants and hearing them struggle with the SaaS landscape is where we, couldn't resist.
I can see how the e-commerce ecosystem has evolved a lot since when you first got started to today, because it felt like when I was getting into it in like 2018, 2019, it still was very much so you use an app for everything. Like there's one app for reviews, there's one app for upsells, there's one app for personalization, there's one app for quizzes, and there was sort of this best in class mentality or approach that was being taken, which I think had some of its own merits, but also at the same time just was because the industry was a little bit immature, like it had not evolved or had as much time, like in the B2B space, where you do see a HubSpot having a service hub, a sales hub, a marketing hub, a CMS hub, like a really robust and built out platform, as opposed to just like a product that's a feature that sits within your website. And I still see some Shopify stores that have 60, 70 apps on the website, and it's horrifying. Not only the customer experience, but also the bill that they get at the end of each month from all those various tools.
The bill is crazy. Yeah, I think part of that as well is Shopify has evolved so much as a platform, right? A lot of these apps were built to kind of work around and do stuff that you couldn't do on the, there was no API for bundles. So you had to kind of build some janky app on top of some non-stockable SKU item or whatever. I think that's part of where some of that came from as well.
Yeah, that I take a lot of the stuff in the Shopify platform now for granted, but even 2 years ago, some of the, what I would argue are very simple things did not exist. Bundles was one of them, which was very frustrating. Even things like meta fields on the products, there was a bunch of apps for that to try and work around all those issues. There was a litany of things that you sort of knew eventually they had to build it within the platform itself. But in the interim, there was all these workarounds and all these apps that existed. And some people say, oh, they're like eating their own ecosystem. They're building product now that is sort of replacing some of the apps. But, I'd argue that most of those should be core to the platform itself, and was one of the bigger selling points I would hear from, like a BigCommerce or some of these other platforms back in 2021 and 2022. Like, you don't need to use all these apps because we actually have some of these things built within the platform. Whether or not they're actually great or not was another story. But that was a talk track for sure for a while from a lot of the competing solutions out there.
For sure.
We touched on pricing there for a little bit. And I know you have a little bit of a hot take in terms of where you think SaaS pricing is going. And I have my own hot take on SaaS pricing and also the way that we prefer to, work with certain solutions versus others because of the way that they price. So how do you see that sort of evolving or changing over time here as merchants consolidate into fewer tools and become more aware of what's actually going into their tech stack?
I think charging by percentage of revenue generated or whatever metric people are coming up with there will go away. I think it's ridiculous. And when it's a hot take, it's also like what we're doing every day. Our upselling product is a flat fixed price. It's like $75 or $149. It doesn't matter on order volume or anything. I do think scaling pricing will still exist. Because otherwise you have small customers subsidizing larger customers, where it should be the other way around. If we look at like Slack is free for whatever, they've got some threshold where a team of 3 or 4 could use it, and then they make money with companies like Shopify or HubSpot spending. But I think the whole idea of our app that's a button post-purchase, somebody clicked on it and we're going to clip the ticket a percentage or a percentage of the revenue generated, something upsold something for $100 and they're going to take $2.50. I think that will go away. I think scale pricing will still exist. And I think people want to know what their SaaS is going to cost at the end of the month, at the start of the month. Like it's pretty, I think Shopify charging a percentage makes sense as the payment processor, but the software developers, again, scaling pricing will exist. A store that has $8 million will spend more on SaaS than 8 million orders a year will spend more on software than a product that generates 800,000 orders a year. But I do think, and I might be wrong, but in the meantime, we're going to sell a lot of really cheap software. We've earned the right to be wrong.
I think like feature gating is a nightmare for us as an agency. And it's one of the reasons why we can never really get a lot of merchant traction with loyalty programs outside of the fact that they're pretty, I would say, difficult just to do well. Like I've yet to see, for the most part, a storefront that has a very well thought out loyalty program that's integrated throughout the entire customer journey and actually is adopted and leveraged by its customers. Like more often than not, it's maybe 1% to 2% of customers that use it, and it ends up being more headache than it's worth. But the bigger thing for me was that a lot of them would gate features and functionality that we viewed as critical to having a successful loyalty program behind really expensive paywalls that had nothing to do with, how much revenue, how many sessions, nothing. Like there's no account for that into what the pricing was. And so then for us as an agency, we can maybe only use it for a small subset of our client base versus being able to use it for every merchant. And so it just makes it pretty difficult to actually have adoption, because the way that we prefer to work and operate is, if it works for one client, we're going to want to use it with every client. Like that's part of the way that we go about testing and like trying new solutions and tools. We're doing that for a reason, not so that we can just use it for one client, but if it works for that brand, then, everybody else is going to get the benefit of the fact that we're testing some of these new tools with, some of our merchants. So I can't stand the feature gating. I much prefer, even honestly, the percentage of revenue is better than the feature gating, because it just makes it so much harder to leverage with our merchants.
I think that makes a ton of sense, and that's what we've been talking about internally as well. Is like, is it not the best to just get as much adoption as possible? And that's what's actually going to align everybody's incentives for the long term. Unrelated, I appreciate what you were saying about loyalty. Loyalty is something we think about a lot, as with the Lifetimely product, focusing on lifetime value. Have you had any thoughts about memberships, like these e-commerce brands that are doing maybe, hey, it's as opposed to a subscription, right, which ends up getting cancelled because you go to Brazil or whatever it is, and then you end up with too much shampoo or coffee you don't use. It's, say, instead of that, you buy a membership that's $10 a month. That gives you always 20% off. And you also get $10 a month store credit, and you get a $25 credit on your birthday or something, like a paid membership fee. Have you seen anyone doing those? And the idea being, could be better for the customer, because if you don't use it for 3 months, then you just have 3 times the $10 credit that you can use. Or I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, there's a couple of new solutions that have entered in the past, I'd say, year and a half, with which we have started to test and try with a couple of our merchants. I think it really depends on the product, because there's certain ones that I just don't know how much value can be built within the membership. And so, the thing
if you
that,
have a lifetime guarantee, they probably don't need a membership for your furniture, with a lifetime guarantee. But I do think it's interesting. I'm more curious on the merchant side, like brands, if there was anyone that's doing this super well, because it's something that is currently living rent-free in my head. So it's not
I think
a huge amount of time in.
True Classic is doing a pretty great job of that, in the way that they're able to. I think they started with a much higher price point, but they just recently brought it down. I don't have it in front of me here, but I think it's like $5 a month or something. Like really,
awesome.
Really cost effective for a customer. And the thing that was the biggest issue for me with loyalty programs is that more often than not, the ability to redeem was put upon the customer. So you'd have to, log into your account, figure out how many points you have, figure out what that even means, then redeem those points for some sort of a code that you then have to go then take into checkout. Or, if you were a subscription customer, it would actually force you to get back in there and apply it versus it just auto applying. So for me, memberships alleviate a lot of those headaches and pain points, because you're just signing up for the membership and then automatically all of these things occur. So then you can just go back to buying from the brand, which ultimately is what we're trying to incentivize, not here's the 24 different steps that you need to take to be rewarded as one of our best customers. And for a merchant, it can generate a lot of additional revenue if it's done well and implemented thoughtfully. The thing that scares me about it is if you sort of roll out a bunch of different tiers, or a program that your business isn't actually set up to support, and then you end up with customers who are displeased with the fact that they just spent a lot of money on something that isn't an actual physical product, and then the follow through and the benefits aren't there.
No. I think it's a subset of brands it's applicable for, but it could be better in some cases than subscription. For certain products and merchants. That's interesting on True Classic. I'll have to go and subscribe. They're a great customer of Lifetimely. I'm thinking we're going to have to build some stuff for them to help them analyze how that's performing inside Lifetimely. I got a black True Classic t-shirt on right now. I should go and sign up.
We didn't even plan this, so look at that. No. Perfect example.
Yeah, nice.
So going back into sort of your founder journey and the way that you're building AMP versus your previous company, what are some of the things that you're doing differently than last time? Not even necessarily because you viewed it as a mistake. You just think this is the sort of a unique approach that we're going to take to this versus prior.
Yeah. So I think what we're doing differently last time, but the company that I sold to G2.com, that was bootstrapped. And this time we are VC backed, and that's more just to bring forward our aggressive plans on R&D and integration. And, that's really having world-class products from the start is just an investment we're happy to make with our very long-term view on, we liked building e-commerce, software for e-commerce merchants in 2013. 11 years later, we still love it. So that's where we just have that long-term approach and just really going deep on building our products, building out a serious engineering team. I think the other thing I'm leaning into more now, and it could be because we're remote, but I'm a little bit older. I'm 35 now, so sorry for breaking the Gen Z brief. On this is the leadership versus management. In a way, like, leadership's actually kind of easy. If you have a really, really, really smart team, you can kind of change direction. You can set like a clear vision, but you can iterate along the way. And then I'd say management, especially with a remote team, documenting everything properly, is kind of a different skill that we're leaning into more this time, rather than having, it's actually not that hard to grab the 8 smartest people in the organization and go and do something really, really difficult, really, really fast, with a clear vision. But to bring a broader organization along, it requires a lot more thoughtfulness, finesse, documentation, communication, expectation setting, goal setting. So that's something we're leaning into. And then the other thing would be is we just have a smaller, more experienced, more expensive team.
I think costs in general just continue to go up across the board. But to your point about processes, how do you go about sort of building those into the company, but then not sort of turning into a place where, the process is everything and it's sort of fixed in stone, and there's not room and opportunity for improvement or for different ways of approaching things, if there may in fact be a better way to do it. Does it reminds me of when I was so focused on trying to productize the agency, in the sense of, I could leave for 3 months and it would run itself, which I think was a pipe dream, realistically. But we built all these processes. The thing that was super important for me was to still make sure that the team thought or had the ability to make changes to those processes, versus some of the internships I had back in the day at some larger companies where the process was the process and you just didn't question it, type of deal.
Yeah, totally. I'd say we're actually still super, super light on process. Let me give an example, right? In December, we decided, so we have the upselling product, which does everything you would expect it to do: post-purchase upsell, cart, use the Lifetimely data, and we have Lifetimely. And they actually kind of looked and felt a little bit different, where they need to look and feel the same. So say when you're switching from HubSpot CRM to HubSpot Marketing Automation, it's very clearly the same product. You automatically auth in. So that was something that we decided to do in December. I think the 13th of December, just before the holidays. Great idea. But the reason it worked is what we did is we originally wrote a 3-page document explaining exactly why we were doing it, what was important, what was included, really tightened in the scope, dialed back all existing non-critical work for customers. And then we said, hey, and we want to do it really, really fast. We want this to be live in 3 weeks, say. And what that allowed us to do, and it's and if anybody has any problem with it or ideas or reason with that won't work, we want to talk about it tomorrow, and then again the day after that, really bringing it. So cool. Not everyone. So the 3-page document goes out along with an 11-minute Loom video from me talking through it, slow and steady, exactly why we're doing it. Then we have a kickoff call. Then we're not talking about it next Tuesday. We're talking about it in 2 days. And that also just brings forward, when trying to do something difficult, providing all that context and documentation. One, it sets everybody up a lot more for success, like a successful outcome at the end of the 3 weeks. And it also drives everybody to find the difficult reasons why it wouldn't work right at the start. Like, hey, if it's a 3-month project, you can be like, I might redesign the sidebar. Ooh, how do we think about what are the different modals we could use? Like, what should the loading screen look like? But so that would be an example there, a practical example.
Yeah,
where before I may have just grabbed like the most experienced engineer in the team and be like, let's fucking do this.
On the software side of things and going through learning what that process is like in terms of not only just building the original platform and product to begin with, but what feature iteration looks like, and not being the one who can push all the buttons and do everything as well is a little bit of a different sort of beast than with the agency. We weren't building tech. We were leveraging a bunch of other solutions, obviously for our clients. And I could spend the whole weekend actually doing putting out end work product that would then show up in our customers' inboxes on Monday. Whereas
and
I'm
you could
useless.
Presumably do everybody at the company's job, like
right.
to a degree, as good as them, often better than them, sometimes not as good as them if it's like SEO, but or like something very technical. But is that fair to sort of extrapolate from what you were saying?
Yeah, I mean, because every department was essentially stood up by me to begin with, and then I ran it until we would get somebody in, or the demand merited somebody else taking that over. Whereas with the software side, I'm pretty much useless when it comes to actually building into our roadmap and pushing the product further along. So I'm now in that sort of role where that is much more of a managerial role than necessarily if this isn't working, let me just hop in and fix it and then set you up for success. I'm much more at the whims of the team than I necessarily was in the past.
Yeah, it's an interesting challenge. A couple of things come to mind. You still definitely understand the customer, and that's the most important thing. And there's still a degree of, I was listening to an episode of Marketing Against the Grain recently, and they're like, hey, if you can't explain something to me in a way that I understand it, you're stupid. I'm not stupid. It's not that hard. That's your job to, I'm not impressed. It's not that difficult. It means this is a flaw on your side. So I think that's one interesting thing there. And then the other interesting thing to think about it is from a military perspective, not to say that I have a militaristic approach to leadership, but that is another example of, if you're a captain on the ground, you will have a medic in your team. You'll have a comm specialist in your team. You'll have all these highly specialist roles that are way better. You might even know how to do any technical comms work, but you still need to be able to lead that group. And it does happen a lot. It just doesn't happen as much. It happens a lot in the real world. It just doesn't happen as much in functions. Like if you're the VP of finance, you're probably better at finance than everybody on the finance team, or at least know intimately what all of them do. Same for marketing, same for software engineering. But that's our unique challenge, I guess.
Yeah. Aside from the obvious around the differences between, bootstrapping and raising, what's maybe one thing that people don't think of when they're comparing the two or deciding the path for them to go when they're building their business, that you've sort of learned over the past couple of years here?
It's a good question. So what is a difference that may be less obvious between bootstrapping and VC? To answer it a different way, I think the mistake I see people making the most is raising too much money and thinking about the amount they raised on the valuation, right? So just some hypothetical numbers. If somebody raises 10 mil on 100 mil valuation and they're at, I don't know, a million ARR. Let's keep the numbers really simple. A million ARR, 10 mil raised on 100 mil valuation. And they're running around being like, yeah, we still own 90% of the company. And it's like, mate, I've got some fantastic news or some terrible news. You own 0% of that company because no one's going to buy your company for more than $10 million unless there's some, in most cases. So I'd say that's a thing that people fail to understand is that capital is preferential capital. And if you sell that company for $7 million, they get all. You might get yourself a deal bonus or something, but like you don't actually own the company. I think the second thing I think this whole question is kind of convoluted. Is people use this mistakenly sometimes because they're like, it's not really up to most people. Most of the time, sometimes you hear founders being like, oh yeah, we're decided to bootstrap. We decided not to do the venture path. It's like, oh, really? You decided that your fucking size chart was not going to be venture backed? I'm like, I didn't, it's not really I think this sort of question gets a lot of attention. But if we actually look about the number of real, proper venture, I don't mean some private financing, but proper venture financing looking for big returns. It's not, very few people are in a position to. I think this got a lot of airtime on Twitter and stuff, and is often used. I've done both, but I think it probably gets a little bit more airtime. But I think people understanding that they are taking on custody of capital, and their job is to make a lot of money for their investors on the back of that is a very serious thing that people don't necessarily understand. So that's mistakes from people making capital. And mistakes from people flexing on Twitter that they are not doing VC. I'm not sure it was
a choice.
it was no, plenty of times it is. Don't get me wrong. Lots of amazing founders bootstrap. I mean, that weird part of the Venn diagram that, obviously the most successful bootstrappers. I just mean the people tweeting about
talking the loudest about it.
They're sort of taking glory from the legendary bootstrappers of our age, like DHH and Jason Fried and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's some really cool, I'd say, past examples of businesses that were spun out of an agency or spun out of some business that was already profitable that would then take that profit to essentially be the investment vehicle for the software company that they started. And whether it's like MailChimp or ConvertKit or some of these other companies, they were started out of that.
That it definitely could be VC backed if they wanted to.
Yes. Yeah. And it's just fascinating to see how they were able to sort of take control of that component of it via another sort of revenue channel that they had up and running.
Absolutely. Completely agree. Incredible builders as well. And definitely not the case for them, but we actually did that at Advocately as well, where we did some consulting at the start. But that's because we didn't have a choice. We were in our mid-20s living in Singapore. We had to get some cash going. It wasn't like and if you listen to the MailChimp founder as well, he's like, we didn't mean to invent freemium. He just gave a great talk at MicroConf recently, I believe.
Nice. I enjoy when those folks are still out there and sort of talking about their story and everything that went into it. But I heard an interesting sort of hot take last night that there's actually probably too much focus and time spent on the success stories because, if you look at it from a statistics standpoint, these are the outliers, and it's a false assumption to take all the outliers, try and pull certain things out of all of them that are similar across the board, and then say that, if you do these 30 things, then you also will have a MailChimp. That's just not really how it works.
No, it's interesting. I was with a guy in Singapore a month or so ago who's publicly listed a bunch of companies over his, he's probably got 20 or 30 years experience. And then, yeah, he was saying some people had gave him some disparaging feedback about listing companies because, there's so much pressure to deliver. And he's like, of course there's pressure to deliver. Like, what are you talking? It's not for you. Like, if you don't want to look at the outliers and say, hey, I'm going to do that, but I'm going for the outlier result. Like, you have to, that's the game. Like, don't play the game if you don't want to, or be honest that you're not going for an outlier. Yeah.
I think, do you think about your business and then look at the end goal and then work your way back from that? Like, are you thinking, I'm going to do this with it, or, I'm going to exit it, or I'm going to scale it, I'm going to take it public, whatever it may be? Are you thinking about that and then working your way backwards, or no?
No, not this time. This is the long-term one for us. We started this with 11 years of context. We had a couple of exits already, so there's no short-term incentive, or we're not driven by a short-term incentive. Helping merchants is something we're passionate about. We've already seen the evolution so much. Shopify at the start was actually a huge cohort of their company was indie creators, like people making knives or soap or candles or beard oil at home. And then there was the sort of huge drop shipping era, and then D2C started popping up. And now we're talking about branding. We're in this for the long term, so we don't have any. We also think that the stuff we tackle is we try and tackle stuff that's going to be more important. Shopify has gone from 6 billion in revenue to 8 billion in revenue since we started. We think it's getting bigger and more dominant. We love developing on the platform, and then with products like Lifetimely as well. We see profitability getting more important, lifetime value getting more important, attribution getting more difficult, as these other, like, we think the more sales channels people introduce, the more complicated it gets. So that's what we drive to. We have a very long time horizon as well. But again, that said, I'm not saying everybody should do that. I loved selling my company at 29 and buying a house, and like, it was cool. Like, so I'm not trying to say our way is the way for everybody. In fact, it's such a wonderful position to be in, to start a company with such a long-term view, with these aggressive mentalities around pricing and creating value for merchants and stuff like that as well. You kind of need to be in it for the long term.
The continual growth of Shopify, despite all the headwinds that e-commerce is facing, whether it's the privacy changes that have been rolled out, there's another new I don't know if I'd call it a rule necessarily, but all the regulations around Gmail in particular when it comes to spam rate and things like that coming in the next couple of weeks here. It feels like, if you just look at it from far, that merchants should be struggling, and there should be a decrease in the GMV that they're able to generate. But Shopify continues to grow, and despite those rising costs of customer acquisition, there's still so many brands that are out there that are doing super well and are able to sort of try new methodologies around customer acquisition and be at the forefront of some of these new opportunities, whether it's TikTok Shop, or maybe focusing a little bit more on Amazon because the margins just don't make a ton of sense from a Shopify standpoint. To your point about additional channels, I was really excited to see the Amazon integration that you guys now have within Lifetimely, because that's always been something that's been known. Like, we're going to be spending money on Meta ads and or Facebook ads, and they're going to the website, but some of those people are going to end up purchasing on Amazon. But do we even really know what's happening there? what does the halo effect look like? What is the attribution? But it's made, for me, going through and selling Lifetimely into the merchants that we work with so much easier over the past 2 years, because there's been such a greater focus on retention than there ever was before. What are you seeing on your end as it relates to merchants dealing with these rising customer acquisition costs, and brands focusing on retention more and more, to the point that they're even hiring a retention marketing manager in a way that 3 years ago, that wasn't the case.
Yeah, I want our team to prepare some data around this, like get us, we have, whether it's, number of retention job ads available right now, or number of people, teams, organizations that have a retention person or retention director or retention marketer that didn't have one years ago. We had our offsite in February, and, the banner when everyone walks in is retention is growth. Every customer you can keep or get to purchase again is actually just is more fuel. It makes the new customers you're adding significantly more effective. We're seeing people increase, try and use the lifetime lead data to increase average order value on the first purchase, but also looking at what products have the highest repurchase rate. There are some of the tactical things we're seeing. We're seeing Amazon get adopted more and more. We're seeing, attributions, work in progress. It's a moving carpet, right? What worked to attribute a few months ago or a few years ago doesn't work now. That's fine. But we are seeing merchants, it's like, hey, we can't directly attribute this meta spend to these Amazon sales, but when we stop spending on meta, the sales stop and those kind of things. So there are a few things that come to mind, but post-purchase upsells based on order history, focusing on these kind of cohorts and seeing how they perform over time. We're actually seeing traffic go up. Like, even if we factor in our customer growth, the usage of the retention components of the product is going up. Where before, say, so there was a subset of customers that just used the profit component of our business.
Yeah. And I think, more and more merchants are asking more of their platforms than they were before. There was a lot of, I would say, dashboards or solutions out there that might be able to show you what your customer lifetime value is. But like, okay, great. I'm glad that I know that, but what do I do now? That to me has always been the missing component, either in the software itself or in the way that the brand is, using analytics and dashboards. And the funniest thing to me is, some companies would get across a certain threshold of revenue and they'll go, sign up for Tableau or like one of these crazy softwares. Like, oh, so you guys are going to hire a team to manage that? And like, what sort of insights
have their own looker or whatever.
Yeah. That just, to me, it's more about, here's the data, but this is what you should do as a byproduct of that. And so that's why I really, appreciate being able to leverage Lifetimely with our clients, because we can then take those insights, take those analytics, and actually put forward tactics, change strategy to be able to impact that on an incremental basis. And that's so much different than, here's a solution that just shows you a bunch of metrics, but you're not really able to do much with it. It's more of a nice to have than something that's actually making a meaningful business impact.
Totally. And like, that's something we are trying to get better at as well. Trying to, we don't want there ever to be a closed door. People always should be able to ask a follow-up question or be prompted, say, hey, now you've got to this point in your analysis, like merchants like you often then take these actions. Someone on our team built a custom GPT last week on some sample data that we've been playing around with internally. Yeah, we do want to, we want people to be able to ask more follow-up questions, like more custom metrics is the other form factor we've been testing. So we have a lot of empathy for merchants there and a lot of appetite to help with that. So yeah, it's what we have is fine, but it'll be the worst version we ever have.
I like that. That's a good way to look at it. Yeah. I was just to say, we're trying to build like a culture of continual improvement. Doesn't mean that what we're doing right now is bad, but like it literally can always be better.
Yeah. And I think it's good to create a lot of positive activity around that, because in a high paced environment driven around continual improvement, it's not about the past thing being bad. Like it's all good. We're just now going to, improve the speed of our data sync, which will make all the integrations better and first set up better. And people's reporting over crazy sale periods significantly, a 3-minute or 15-minute sync.
Yeah, that's something that I've been learning more and more about, is the way that you actually set up the infrastructure of the platform is so critical to being able to build like features and functionality on top of it, and is one of the reasons why maybe we don't move as fast in certain areas as I would like, because there's a whole bunch of things that have to happen from like a scale perspective and the ability to handle, let's say, 1 million different people all hitting the system at the same time to try and do this one particular action. Which has been awesome having that team in place who's able to support and provide like that context. And I feel like I felt back in 2019 entering in the ecosystem, just drinking from a fire hose in terms of learning all these different awesome things that go into it. But I do want to touch on just one question on the AMP like product side of things. Obviously not encouraging this, because I see merchants do this far too often, where they download an app and they don't actually leverage it in the way that they should. But if there was one thing within all of your product offerings that like every merchant should be doing, what is that in your opinion? What is the like number one lowest hanging fruit if somebody were to come to you and say, what should I be doing with the AMP products?
Yeah, so two thoughts there. One, anybody who who's a proper merchant, like 7, 8, 9-figure brand, who doesn't have a proper daily P&L set up that factors in all their spend from all their platform and the performance, they should definitely set that up. Like it doesn't take that long. I think that's a really useful thing. I think start tracking LTV cohorts so you can figure out how to improve them would be the second. They're kind of the two things that I'd really encourage merchants to do. What do you think? You've got a lot of experience with lifetime.
From like a revenue generation standpoint, the upsell product is such a no-brainer for me. You're literally just taking your existing orders and adding additional AOV to them. You already have those customers. Like there's no harm in any way whatsoever by implementing that. And I basically look at it as like free revenue for the merchants. But I definitely agree with your cohort point too, because there's been a lot of really interesting insights that have come out of that as it relates to where to spend media dollars. Because in platform, let's say on Facebook ads, you might see, this is a positive ROAS, or, we're acquiring these customers for really cheap. But you'll see in lifetime, though, that these customers, they suck. They're not coming back and they're and reordering. They don't have a high LTV, but maybe a group in Facebook is costing a little bit more to acquire, but they're coming back at a significantly higher repurchase rate. They're spending much more. They're, doing those types of things. And that's been really useful for us.
Totally. The only thing I'd like to add to this is any Lifetimely customers listening to this who have ideas about what we can do better, please hit us up and let us know, because we've got a very aggressive roadmap, and we do want to, so not trying to, if I could get, that would be my dream, is that people hit us up and tell us what we can do better.
How do you balance taking in the customer feedback versus staying true to, your product roadmap and where you see the vision of the product actually going?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the customer feedback drives the roadmap. We do filter the customer feedback, though. We do have concepts of ideal customer profile. If somebody's got their first 20 orders, we don't that doesn't really factor into our, not like customer does not equal customer, I guess would be one thing. The other thing we filter for is the problems they're trying to solve. And then we want to see, one thing we look for is hey, how are you doing this now? Oh, we're not doing it now. Oh, I want some ugly spreadsheet somewhere that somebody has to prepare once a day, or oh, I go into Facebook Ad Manager and then I do this and then I export it and then or I'm doing this in Lifetimely and then I get to this point and then I use your Google Sheets integration, or I'm using this software tool. So I'd say filter number one is on ideal customer profile. Filter number two is the problem, not the solution. So for example, people not knowing what to do with the insights from Lifetimely. No one's like, I want an AI chatbot, but maybe that is the best form factor to help them solve the problem. And then number three would be is you want to see intent. Let's say you and I did a customer development interview with a merchant that we were working on a software product together before. The person said, oh, I really need an address verifier. It's the most important thing. It's so painful for me when somebody puts in the wrong address and then I need to contact them and then we need to update the address on the order and then the shipping charge is wrong and they need to check out again and we've got to... It's like, oh, cool. Like, I understand. That sounds really painful. There's so many address verifiers. Like, you never tried to solve the problem. So I think like that would be an example of a filter we apply. So yeah, that would be but really apart from that though, as far as if the feedback fits into as far as what's on the roadmap already, it should all be driven by the customers. We have a rule internally. Every single ticket needs to mention the customer and what it's going to do for them. Per A4 page of writing, it's got to mention the word customer/ICP 8 times or it gets canceled and the meeting is canceled. There should be nothing on the roadmap that is not about the customers. That's the main thing for us. That's the thing we're doing the same from the previous startup, is just obsessing over the customer.
I like that. That's a really unique way to sort of filter down to what actually matters. I assume though, like, you have to think a little bit further ahead of the merchant as well. And you mentioned channels, and we all know that, Shopify has spent a lot of time and money on, alternative channels to its standard, like online D2C storefront, whether it's B2B, retail. I can't tell you in those editions how many of the 100 plus are for, POS Go, all these different components. How do you see the future of not only just Shopify, but of retail evolving? Because, COVID was obviously the sort of anti-retail period where you literally were not going into stores, to now where a lot of people are craving those in-person experiences, but also Shopify is looking at it as an area of opportunity to, pick up more GMV and provide an integrated customer experience. So how are you thinking about that, and where does AMP fit into it? But even more holistically, like, what does that future of retail look like for you?
It's a good question. So completely agree on Shopify Editions. On the earnings calls, it's even crazier how much, like, the amount of and the POS product is awesome. It's so good. When I first saw it, it was primarily for those indie creators who would sell online and would go to a pop-up shop and they could make a few sales. And it's an amazing product. I think for Shopify, they are focusing on getting traditional retailers online. Like, if you look at, that's how they're expanding their GMV, whether it's a Tom's or something there that will have a distinct global brand, 100 plus retail locations. I think it's something they're really driving towards. I think the product is awesome. I was chatting with my co-founder about it today. We don't have anything right now. I think for us, the AI stuff we were talking about, like helping people answer their follow-up questions, is important. We are going into attribution. POS is something that excites us. And as far as the future of retail, it's going nowhere, dude. I live in Singapore. The video streaming, all of e-commerce trends tend to start in Asia or China. Not all of them expand, but a lot of them do. And I think the malls are packed. And it's a huge e-commerce market, right? We've got the Amazon competitor called Lazada out here. Does like 1 million orders in Thailand in a day in 2019. It's huge. So I think retail will continue to be meaningful. And then the final thing is, I think this is D2C evolves and brands in general. There's the brand, and then there's the customer, and retail is just another touch point. So Feastables, they use our software, for instance. It's a brand new brand. They're in every Walmart, as you know from the YouTube videos. In Singapore, they're at every 7-Eleven, not some flagship 7-Eleven at the airport. So within a couple of years of launching, they're every 7-Eleven. I went past a mall the other day, my neighborhood mall, not the Marina Bay Sands flagship mall. There's a vending machine just with Mr. Beast stuff in it. So I think they're just all different. Yeah, they're all just different ways that people connect with brands. And I think it's still driven direct to consumer. You know, like it's Mr. Beast is creating the demand. But I do think that retail's going to be really big. But we don't have anything on our immediate term roadmap. Immediate term roadmaps more around, like, we are getting into, we're fixing a load of data sync issues. We've got a small bunch of, we're always working on improvements, Amazon multi-store, shipping cost improvements, which are really important. And then we're going to do a full attribution tool, which we're excited about. We've got some mock-ups in Figma now. Like, that's what's going into the next stage of customer development. And then we'll see how far that goes, but we're working on that. And, you know, we need to do some more marketing integrations like Attentive and Postscript and that kind of thing. And then just furthering the upsell integration. I want upsell to be like, use all the lifetimely data. It's like a custom experience based on the aggregate of the store data for every visitor. Like, if you had 1 hour with with a mathematician to figure out statistically what would be the best upsell path for that buyer based on the aggregate of that store's data, that's what I want that experience to be.
Yeah, I feel like the closer we can get to one-to-one commerce experiences, the better off we're all going to be. There's been so much overusage of that sort of term, though, one-to-one personalization, because I'd argue nobody is actually doing it. You know, you're getting closer and closer, but to truly do one-to-one personalization, I think there needs to be a heavy dose of AI in there. And also analytics being leveraged, because, like, how am I supposed to know what that person is supposed to receive at a certain time? Like, it's crazy.
Yeah. And I'm not promising, so two thoughts there. I'm not promising that it's going to be one-to-one, but we can at least use the lifetimely data, and then the upsell can be automatically running tests, and then know how those tests perform. And then the machine learning and lifetimely can then take over. But I also think, though, this undermines a total counterpoint, which is none of that really matters. There's no AI that's going to tell Ridge Wallet to launch rings, or there's no AI that's going to tell Ridge Wallet to launch luggage, suitcases, whatever, whatever you want to call them. So there is always going to be this balance of the brand and product is still going to be number one and number two, and we just provide some tooling to help optimize. But I think that in fact, in the world of AI, is merchants' ability to innovate in those regards is with branding and with amazing products is going to stay.
Yeah, agreed. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This was really insightful. I appreciate you taking the time. Before we hop off here, though, can you let everybody know where they can find you online if they want to talk more and learn more?
Sure. Yeah. You can find us on the Shopify App Store at usamp.com. I'm PC_Barnes on Twitter. We have a free benchmarking product. So if you just Google apparel, Shopify benchmarks, or any variation of those terms, you should find us in the top few. It's just like a free thing to check out that we hope is useful. Awesome.
Well, again, thank you for coming on. For everybody listening, as always, this is Brandon Amoroso. You can find me at brandonamoroso.com and electricmarketing.com. And we will see you next time.